Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, and in this lesson I'm going to walk you through the knowledge and skills categories for the SAT math sections. I have a separate video on the reading section that I think is a lot more helpful in terms of just understanding what the categories mean, but even on math, these categories contain a lot of different types of questions. So I'm going to break that down for you and tell you my categories for their different question types and how to improve in each of them, just giving you a very basic overview of what you can do to start filling in more of these boxes on the score report. Remember though, this is the same thing that you're going to get whether you take an SAT or a PSAT. The only difference is that the PSAT has slightly different distributions of the questions as part of the entire section. So those percentages might be a little different if you're looking at a PSAT score report, but they're pretty much the same. So it's not really going to affect too much how you study, but this is going to be in addition to the other parts of the score report, which you probably care much more about, the numbers out of 1600 and 800 for each subject. But trying to get a better score next time is really important to know what you're dealing with. So hopefully I can help you break these down. Let's start with the first category here, algebra. Well, you probably know what algebra is, but the SAT has a very specific definition. This is from the College Board website describing what the algebra category consists of. Algebra measures the ability to analyze, fluently solve, and create linear equations and inequalities, as well as analyze and fluently solve equations and systems of equations using multiple techniques. Okay, so that's a little too jargon heavy for most of us to understand, but let me put this in simple terms. Basically, the SAT's algebra category consists of linear equations. So that's just stuff that has no x squared. That's basically where they draw the line, no x squared. So there's lots of ways that they can ask about linear equations. They can give you actual equations. They can give you graphs. They can tell stories that involve linear equations. There's lots of things that could go into this category, but basically you will not see an x squared in this grouping of questions. That's opposed to the advanced math category, which has got a little bit more variety in here. The advanced math area measures skills and knowledge central for progression to more advanced math courses, including demonstrating an understanding of absolute value, quadratic, exponential, polynomial, rational, radical, and other nonlinear equations. So the key there is nonlinear, but let's put this in some simpler terms so that non-math geniuses can understand what's going on in this category. The most important pieces of this are that you're going to have a lot of quadratic equations and exponential equations. So quadratics, remember, have an x squared, they form a parabola, and then exponentials are the ones that kind of go all the way up really, really fast, and those are ones where the x is the exponent. So those two are very important. There's lots of things to memorize about those, but you're also going to see some other more random categories with maybe just one or two questions per test. Things like radicals, they're going to include the exponent rules, they might include absolute value, and for whatever reason, the SAT also includes what I consider basic algebra in here. I've seen questions where it's literally just about like distributing across some parentheses, so it's not particularly complicated. So where the SAT is drawing the line, I don't really know, but it seems like basically algebra consists of lines and then advanced math is everything else, or at least everything else that I would consider algebra. But just like in the last category, this is also going to include different kinds of things. They might give you equations, they might give you graphs or stories. So whether they ask about a quadratic as an equation or as a story, that might impact how you answer the question. So I think that this is a category that is hard to really pin down. The next category, problem solving and data analysis, is also a little bit of a mixed bag. Here we've got a lot in this list here. Problem solving and data analysis measures the ability to apply quantitative reasoning about ratios, rates, and proportional relationships, understand and apply unit rate, and analyze and interpret one and two variable data. So to me, this is leaving out some key pieces of this, the most important being that this is largely the statistics questions, okay? Including stuff about surveys and how bias creeps into those surveys. So that wasn't really in that description, but it's an important part of these questions. So are scatter plots, which kind of overlap a little bit with some of the other things we've talked about with lines and quadratics, but not always. But it also includes things that are much more, in my opinion, arithmetic-based. Things like percentages and ratios. That can also include probability, which is also kind of statistics, and then unit conversion, which involves multiple ratios. So this is a kind of catch-all category for lots of different things, but it's useful in terms of just like separating it out from algebra. But the last category, geometry and trigonometry, well, it doesn't have a description. The College Board literally did not provide one on their website, but that's because it kind of describes itself. This category consists of geometry and trigonometry, mostly geometry. So not really a lot of nuance to this. That's pretty straightforward. But let's talk about this in a little bit more detail, because on the score report, they list these 4 categories, and the way that they're kind of listed, it seems like they're all equivalent, but they're not. You can kind of get this from the percentages that they give you, that the distribution of these categories is a little bit different. On the SAT, the algebra and advanced math make up the bulk of the questions by far. So that is where most of your time studying should be spent. So that's a good thing to kind of note. If your worst category is geometry, maybe yes, you can get those like extra points back by studying the geometry rules, but you're probably only talking about like 2 questions that you missed. So that's not a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. Whereas if you did only slightly better in the algebra category, according to those boxes that we saw at the beginning, then that still might account for like 5 or 6 questions that you need to improve on. So the distribution is important to consider when you're thinking about how to prioritize your time prepping. You really want to put all of your effort, or most of your effort, in algebra and advanced math. That's where the points are. But let's talk a little bit differently about the score report. So we do have their categories, but I categorize things a bit differently based on where I think students tend to struggle and ways that they should kind of budget their time. So if you use my website or my YouTube channel to review any practice tests that you take, you will see that I do not use the categories that the SAT gives. And that's because they don't list those categories on the practice test, which boggles my mind. It just makes no sense to me. So instead, I have grouped things a little bit differently. I do have an algebra category, but it's not quite the same. It does include a little bit of linear algebra, but to me, these are questions that are much more about the process of algebra, how to move things across an equation, or how to turn words into an equation, and even things like the exponent rules, which the SAT considers advanced math. I would lump that in with algebra. It's much more about just like the rules of working with variables. Whereas a much bigger category for me, in fact, the biggest by far, is what I call XY plane. And so this includes a lot of the linear stuff that we were talking about in the algebra category before, but now I'm lumping it in with the quadratics and the exponentials, because to me, these are actually all the same. When I'm thinking about what a y-intercept is, I don't care whether that's the y-intercept of a line or the y-intercept of a parabola. A y-intercept, regardless of what kind of thing it forms, you're going to plug in a 0 for x and solve for the y. That's how we solve for y-intercept. So it doesn't matter whether it's a line or a parabola. So the fact that the SAT splits that apart doesn't really make much sense to me. I think that those are really the same skill, so we want to put them in the same category. So for me, XY plane is really like the biggest thing, because it includes all of these different equations. Whether we have a graph or not, it's still thinking in graphical terms that really helps us solve those questions. For problem solving and data analysis, I've broken this out into 2 basic categories. We have what I call numeracy, which is a lot of the arithmetic stuff, just understanding how percentages work, how fractions work, ratios work, and also statistics, which is kind of its own thing. And then geometry is just geometry. So that's nice and simple. So when you are reviewing your practice tests, it's helpful to try to figure out what you can do with each of these categories to improve your score. So I do want to stress that I am not going to get into tons of detail here. I have plenty of lessons, including a 10-episode digital SAT strategy series that I highly recommend, that will give you much more insight into all these different strategies I'm going to talk about, but this is a good way to kind of start thinking about it. If you struggle with algebra, my algebra category, then I do think that Khan Academy is going to be a great resource for you. Khan Academy is great just because it teaches you the basics. It doesn't have any of the tricks or traps that the SAT is involved with, and the algebra category is a lot of that, just getting the process of algebra down. So there in Khan Academy, you can do a lot of that repetitive work that you need to use to just really build your algebra skills. For the XY plane, though, we're going to have a lot of SAT strategies. You're going to need to know how to use the Desmos calculator. That's going to make a lot of things really, really easy. Plus, you've got those little acronyms there that stand for plug points into equations, guess and check, and arithmetize, the 3 main strategies that specifically work on the SAT. And like I said, I've got a whole lesson on just those strategies. They're really important. But yes, at the end of the day, this is also going to involve some memorization of formulas, just like you would need for math class in school. So we do need to understand how to read a quadratic equation, for example, and pull out the right points. For numeracy, a lot of this is really just coming down to trap answers. They're going to ask things about numbers where maybe there's like a kind of an instinctive answer, but it's not quite right. And so we need to be able to understand when to trust our instincts and when there's like a formula or some sort of process that we need to follow to make sure we don't fall for those traps. With statistics, we're also going to do some memorization, but here it's a lot more about memorizing vocab because there's only a few formulas for statistics, like average and range, but things like standard deviation and bias and margin of error, these are much more conceptual, and that's really what those statistics questions are about, is understanding conceptually how statistics work and change when we manipulate the data. And with geometry, we are going to need to memorize the formulas, though some of them are provided to us on the test, but a lot of it is getting back to basics. If they have a confusing question that seems more complicated, how do we get that back to the basic formulas of triangles, circles, and rectangles that we know? So there is a lot that goes into this math section. That's what makes it difficult. It's multiple years of math in school that come into just one SAT. So you've got to learn a lot. But like I said, my channel is a great place to start. I highly recommend that whenever you take a Bluebook practice test, you use my website, my channel to review. You will get my categorizations, and I have a video for literally every single official SAT question, and it always emphasizes the strategies which the College Board explanations do not do. So please go to my channel. I think it'll be the best way to improve your score and learn new ways about thinking of these. And also please subscribe. I'm always releasing new lessons and different ways to memorize formulas and things like that, so you'll never miss a new lesson if you subscribe. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less, Settele for more. Thanks so much for watching.